Bruchim Aboim. Welcome to part 3 of our overview of the Melochos. In part 2 we spoke in depth about the weaving process as related to Sedurah, the 13 Melochos that were needed to create the wool coverings in the Mishkan. We will now continue with the next 7 Melochos of the Sedurah and then conclude with the last 8 Melochos, the Sedurah Binyan. Sedurah. These 7 Melochos involve the preparation of the hides that were used for the leather coverings of the Mishkan. Besides the original cover of the Mishkan, the Yiriyas HaMishkan, which were made from wool, as discussed earlier, there were 2 more coverings on top of them which were made from the Oiris Elim, the hides of rams, and Oiris Tachashim, from the hide of an animal called Tachash, which, as Rashi explains, Lahoisa El Lasha, only existed during that time in history, and whose hide had many beautiful colors. The first step in getting these hides were trapping the animal. This is the Malach of Tzad, trapping. The Malach of trapping applies midaraisa only when the following 2 conditions are met. It must be done to a wild or untamed animal that a person would trap because he wanted to keep it, like a deer or stray dog. The area of confinement must be so that the animal is restricted in its movement. An example of this would be closing a door in a small room with a deer inside. However, if that same room had a small bird flying inside and one would close the door, it would only be tzeidim midrabanan, since the bird still has relatively free movement. On the other hand, the person may cover wasps or bees with a cup on Shabbos if he fears being stung, since a flying insect is not really considered trapped even in a jar, since as soon as one opens it, he would still need to trap it once again from inside the jar. This would also be permitted because it is a malacha she'ena tzrich legufay, as explained earlier in part 1 of our presentation. Sheichit, slaughtering. After capturing the animal, the next step in preparing the hides is to slaughter it. This is the malacha of sheichit. Although the name of this malacha seems to imply a proper kosher shechita, it need not be. This concept behind this av malacha is netilas neshama, taking the life of a creature in any method. A practical example of this malacha is killing a creature, even a tiny insect, and even without causing it to bleed, such as by drowning or suffocation. Also, causing someone to bleed even without killing it is a telada of shechita. And it is because of this malacha that a bris milah would have been prohibited to do on Shabbos, if not for the fact that the Torah writes, by Yom HaShmini, Yimol B'sar Olasei, that the bris must take place on the 8th day, even if it comes out on Shabbos. Mafshet, skinning the animal. After the animal was slaughtered, its hide was removed. This is the malacha of mafshet, skinning. The malacha of mafshet applies to any animal, mammal, fish, or bird, that has a skin which can be removed. Practical example of this malacha is skinning a raw chicken. However, since raw chicken is muktzah on Shabbos, this is not likely to be an issue on Shabbos, but it would be on Yom Tov when cooking is permitted. Ma'abid, tanning. Once the hides were removed, they had to be preserved and transformed into leather. This process is the malacha of ma'abid. The first step is by curing the hide, which is done by soaking the hide in a heavily salted water or brine solution to draw out its natural moisture. The second step, after being thoroughly cleaned of any excess hair or flesh, the hides are then soaked in a tanning solution, sometimes for even weeks, until completely cured or dried. The hides are then stretched to straighten them out. The third and final step is finishing the leather, which is done by applying oils, compressing them with heavy rollers or by trampling on them. Collectively, these steps constitute the process of tanning, but performing any one of them would violate the malacha of ma'abed. Minater ma'abed does not apply to preserving food, however, because it so closely resembles ma'abed, pickling and other forms of food preservation are also midrabanan. Memachik, smoothing. After tanning, the hides had to be scraped to smooth them out and to remove any stray hairs. Scraping a hard substance to make it smooth is the malacha of memachik. Practical examples of this would be sanding a block of wood or scrubbing a pot with steel wool. Even using a bar of soap on Shabbos involves issues of memachik. An important telad of memachik is the malacha of memarich, smearing, which applies to soft and pliable substances such as wax, skin cream, petroleum jelly, or toothpaste. As with many other malachas, memachik does not generally apply to foods. Therefore, one may spread peanut butter, margarine, and similar foods in the normal fashion. Misartit, scoring. The Gemara in Shabbos Daf Ayin Hema Beis adds sirtut to the list of the lamatas malachas in the Mishnah. Before the tanned hides can be made into garments or mats, they must be cut to measured sizes and patterns. So to the Oiris Elim and Oiris Tachashim that were to cover the Mishkan had to first be measured and cut precisely before being sewn together into the large coverings. To cut leather accurately, one must first score a line in the leather that will act as a guide to ensure proper cutting. This is the malacha of sirtut. A practical example of this malacha is folding a piece of paper on Shabbos to indicate where to tear it, even for after Shabbos. However, as with all the malachas of preparing the hides, Mesarta does not apply to food items. Accordingly, one may use a knife to draw lines on the cake to help cut its slices to the desired size. In fact, there's a minhag to score one's challah to indicate where to cut after making the bracha, and this is certainly in accordance with the halacha. And the last malacha of Sedurah the Iris is v'hamachatche. After the hides were scored, they would be cut to the pre-measured sizes. This is the malacha of mechatech. The malacha of mechatech is not referred to just simple cutting. It refers specifically to cutting to predetermined sizes and shapes. The talad of this malacha applies to virtually all substances except food. One need not use a knife or scissors to cut, even just tearing something to size with one's bare hands is mechatech. Examples of this would be opening a box of tissues or separating paper towels along the perforations. We now move on to the last set of 8 melachas, which we classified as Sedurah de Binyan. HaKaisav Shtei Oisies. This final group of melachas has to do with the assembling, disassembling, and transporting of the Mishkan. The Mishkan was basically a portable Beis HaMikdash which was taken apart and then reassembled as the Yidden wandered in the Midbar from place to place. The Mishkan itself was made up of 48 krushim, 48 large boards that were held together by poles, rings, and sockets. These boards had to be reassembled in their proper order, always in the same position. Therefore, they were marked accordingly. For example, the first board would be marked Aleph Beis, then Beis Gimel, the third Gimel Dalet, etc. Marking these boards was the malacha of Kaisav writing. The malacha of Kaisav involves creating any meaningful letter or symbol. As soon as one writes 2 letters of any language, he's over the malacha of Kaisav. It does not have to be with ink on paper. Carving into wood or stone or cutting a letter out of paper or even a rubber stamp, all are considered Kaisav. Drawing a picture is a talad of Kaisav and is asa midiraisa. The malacha of Kaisav applies only to permanent writing. Temporary writing is only prohibited midrabanan. So, for example, writing with one's finger on a fogged-up window is only asa midrabanan. The Chum prohibited many things because of the chashad shemayavei lichtas. Prominent among them is the issur to conduct mekech hamemker, doing any kind of business transactions on Shabbos, and that is in large part because of Kaisav, as one typically records his transactions and agreements. Also included on account of this chashad, among many others, are that in donen b'Shabbos, v'lo choltzin v'lo b'yabin v'lo mekachem b'Shabbos, all because shemayavei lichtas. V'amoichik amanas lichtav shtei oisies. If the boards of the Mishkan were mistakenly marked with the wrong letters, it would need to be erased so that the correct letters could be written in its place. This erasing is the malach of meichik. As with all makalka malachas, the act of meichik min haTorah is only when done lisakin, for a constructive purpose, and that is to clear the surface to be able to write in its place. However, all acts of erasing, such as erasing letters from a sheet of paper or from a whiteboard, or even using whiteout to cover up letters, are also as a telada de meichik. Habayna, building. As mentioned earlier, the Mishkan was basically a portable Beis HaMikdash which was taken apart and then reassembled as the Yidden wandered in the Midbar from place to place. The Mishkan was made up of krushim, for large boards that were held together by poles, rings, and sockets. The roof, on the other hand, that was to shelter the Mishkan was made up of ureas, of wool and hides that were spread out over the krushim. Therefore, assembling a structure or shelter built on the ground is the Av Malacha of Baina. There are 2 central concepts that define the Malacha as it was done in the Mishkan. 1, Medabik Chalakim, assembling separate pieces into a unified structure, and 2, asiyas oil, creating a shelter, a roof over existing walls. Achieving both these objectives is the Av Malacha of Baina. Achieving one of them is a tilad of Baina and also asa midiraisa. Practical examples of medabik halakim are putting together prefabricated furniture, even though doing so does not create a shelter, but it is medabik halakim, assembling separate pieces into a unified structure. And practical examples of asiyas oil are pitching a tent which technically has no walls, or laying schach on the roof an existing sukkah would be a form of creating a shelter even though no walls are yet set up. And it is for the same reason we're not allowed to use an umbrella on Shabbos, because it creates a shelter. Another general rule as to what constitutes an oil is that the top is set up specifically to protect what is underneath. Therefore, one may open and close folding objects such as tables, chairs, or porta cribs, since its purpose is to use the top and not to cover or protect what is underneath. Haseiser. Since the Mishkan was meant to be assembled and disassembled on an as-needed basis, disassembling or breaking apart is the malach of Seiser. As mentioned earlier, all makalkalim were done for an eventual constructive purpose. And in this case, the Mishkan was disassembled so that it could be reassembled later. Taking anything apart with the intention of using its component parts would fulfill this criterion and would be asa midaraisa because it is misakin. On the other hand, destroying for a purely destructive purpose is only asa midrabanan because it is mekalkal. The hamaver, igniting a fire. Fire was needed in building the Mishkan for heating the vats in which the dyes were made and for smelting all the gold, silver, and metals needed for the various utensils. Unlike most malachas, maver is explicitly stated in the Torah at the beginning of Parshat Vayakal, as the pasuk says, "Loisavar ish b'chomesh v'seichem b'yom Shabbos." Because of this malacha, we may not light a fire on Shabbos, nor feed an existing flame by adding wood or oil. We may, however, benefit from fire that was lit before Shabbos, such as lighting Shabbos candles, Erev Shabbos, which gives us light on Shabbos, and of course keeping cooked foods on the fire during Shabbos, as discussed in Melochos Bishul. Also, in today's modern times, it is because of the Isra of Maver that we may not turn on electricity on Shabbos, because it is considered the same as igniting a fire. HaMechaba. The reciprocal malacha of Maver, igniting, is Mechaba, extinguishing a flame. As with Omakalklin, Mechaba was a Mesaken in the Mishkan, extinguishing the flames to make charcoal. Practical examples of this malacha are one may not douse or decrease a flame on Shabbos, nor may we turn off electrical appliances. It makes no difference how the fire is put out. Cutting off the supply of oxygen, such as by inverting a bowl over a flame, is the same as pouring water on it. Makeh b'patish. The krushim were covered with a thin layer of gold. These gold sheets were hammered onto the boards with perfect symmetry. The final hammer blow was the one that finished the job. The malach of makeh b'patish refers to the finishing touch that completes the job. Any act of perfecting an object or rendering it fit for use is considered makeh b'patish, even if it doesn't involve a hammer or any other tools. Similarly, we may not render something fit for use for the first time on Shabbos. For example, putting new laces into a pair of shoes is also makeh b'patish. However, one may restore an object to its useful condition, so replacing a lace that came out of a shoe is permitted. Makeh b'patish is also the reason for the Ism D'Rabbanan of playing musical instruments on Shabbos, because instruments frequently need tuning and minor repairs, such as replacing a torn string. Playing instruments and related activities were permitted on Shabbos to keep us far away from the likelihood of being over this malacha. Hamaitzi Mershus L'Rshus. The final malacha involves transporting items from one halachically defined area to another on Shabbos. When the Mishkan was to be moved to a new location, it was first disassembled. While most of its kalim were carried by hand by the Leviim, the krushim were transported on wagons. These wagons were of such a size that they constitute a Rishus HaYachid, a separate private domain. So when the boards were loaded onto these wagons, they were loaded from Rishus HaRabim, the ground, to Rishus HaYachid, the wagons. Carrying an item from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim, or from the Rishus HaRabim to Rishus HaYachid, is the Av Malach of Hamaitzi Mershus L'Rshus. Osa HaMaver Chevitz Arba Ames Rishus HaRabim. Carrying an item within the Rishus HaRabim 4 or more Ames is called Havara, and is a telada of this malacha, as is Hazerik Arba Ames Rishus HaRabim. Throwing, and also Hamoishid Arba Ames Rishus HaRabim, handing over. The Gemara elaborates as follows. Tarnaban. Arba Rishuyas L'Shabbos. The following are 4 Rishuyas, 4 domains regarding carrying on Shabbos. Rishus HaYachid, Rishus HaRabim, Carmelis, Umakum P'tur. Rishus HaYachid is any private area of at least 4 by 4 tefachim that is enclosed by either a wall or fence or at least 10 tefachim high. Rishus HaRabim is a public domain or highway that is at least 16 amas wide, and a minimum of 600,000 people use it daily. Carmelis is an open area that falls short of being a Rishus HaRabim, but does not have a wall or fence of 10 tefachim enclosing it, and is therefore not a Rishus HaYachid either. Makom P'tur is neither one of the above 3. Therefore, if an item was brought from Rishus HaYachid and placed on a small platform in the Rishus HaRabim, but the platform was less than 4 by 4 tefachim in width, or from 3 to 9 tefachim in height, it is considered to have been put down into a Makom P'tur, an exempt area. While the details of this malach are vast and well beyond the scope of this presentation, a few of the main concepts are Akira and Hanacha. Every transfer must begin with a person lifting the item from its resting place and must end with him placing it down onto a proper resting place. Makom Dalal al Dalet. The item must be lifted from and placed onto a secure and stable area of at least 4 by 4 tefachim. Erevin. A carmelis can be turned into Rishus HaYachid by erecting an erev around its perimeter. While some of the halachas of Erevin are discussed in our Masechta, its halachas are vast and complex and are covered extensively in Masechta's Erevin and are beyond the scope of this presentation. Also not discussed in this presentation are the halachas and concepts of muktzah, which are vast and complex and requires its own dedicated shir. We sincerely hope that this presentation was helpful. Thank you for listening, and Hatzlacha Rabbah.